Hey guys, it's Badmouth. I'm here with Mallory
Hi guys.
and Cole Billups,
Hey everybody.
and we're doing a little bit of an interview sit down talk with none other than Alan Gegax of Classes of Male.
Hey, thanks, Badmouth. I'm really pleased to be on this episode. You guys know CCAs have a very special place in my heart, and I love being a part of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, thank you so much for joining us.
So I guess what we really wanted to kind of do here was, touch base with you and, kind of talk about how your perception of how CCAs are treated is in your neck of the woods, right? You're
Mhm.
Pacific, we're far East Coast from ranging from Texas to the Carolinas. So we have very little idea of how things are going out there. And I'm sure it's, relatively the same everywhere, but I would love to just kind of hear your perception of how people are treated there.
Yeah, no problem. So I am in a fairly large installation. My branch has like 1,500 members, and we have maybe 18 stations, something like that. And in my own experience, it varies widely from station to station. And the big difference from one station to another is whether the supervisors and management recognize for lack of a better term, the basic humanity of CCAs. And it's kind of bad everywhere, but there are some places that have decent supervisors who will try to work with them, who will try to keep things fair. And, there's two parts to that. There's one is the supervisor themselves or the station manager setting the tone, but there's also a role of the steward in keeping management in check. Like a good example of that is with the CCA schedule. There is no obligation to equalize overtime or to equalize hours with CCAs, but there is an obligation buried in the ELM to like treat people equitably and fairly. And in my opinion, a steward can use that to approach management and be like, "Dude, what are you doing here? This isn't productive." So that's kind of where that variation comes from. But yeah, you can have two stations in the same small city, and one treats the CCAs poorly, and the other one treats the CCAs horribly. And so it really is just luck of the draw of where you get sent.
Yeah, no, I love that.
I love the
Yeah,
dichotomy there.
yeah, yeah. Wherever you go, it's going to be poor treatment. Yeah,
Yeah, pretty much.
And
yeah.
I
So that's one
appreciate
of
you.
the. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say I appreciate you bringing up that fair and equitable because that's something that like I've heard stewards talk about and looking at Reddit and on Facebook and stuff where people are asking for help and someone say like, well, there's no equitable treatment. What you just cited there in the ELM saying that well, yeah, it's not directly to CCAs, but in general there should be equitable treatment.
Right.
That's a
That's
great argument.
Mhm. And you can file a grievance on that. It's not as easy to win as something that's black and white, but at a minimum, I've been beating this drum on classes of mail for a while now, that at a minimum, it puts management on notice that, hey, we're not just going to take it. And number two, even if you lose that grievance, your CCA is getting treated like shit anyway. And so nothing is harmed by trying to fight that fight.
Hmm. Yeah, it's at least showing your CCAs that they do have a dog in the fight.
Yep.
You're their dog. Like, no, that's
Yeah,
great.
that is correct. Right. And it lets them know that it empowers them as well because now they know exactly to your point that hey, there's another dog in this fight with me and I can assert my rights and the union's going to have my back.
That's awesome. I think I wanted to, one of the things I wanted to ask because all these podcasts are coming out and stuff, and like you just did a recent episode on like the democratization of information, which is
Yep.
an amazing, great point. And like, could you talk a little bit more about that and like how that sort of like helps bring people into this fight for a better life for all of us?
Yeah. 100%. So where it first really hit home for me was when I went to the national convention in Boston. And what I saw there, I found absolutely shocking because like almost everybody there is a steward or some other form of union activist. And so I go in thinking that like we're all fighters. We're all like John Murphy. And that's where I met John Murphy. And so that's what I was expecting. And then when I went there and saw that essentially every vote, people just deferred to leadership. And there was very little dissent, there was very little argument. And for me, the most shocking vote that happened, I mean, There were plenty of shocking votes, but the most shocking vote was somebody made a motion that, hey, every resolution that the executive board suggests, we should just pass all of them. And I'm like, dude, that's insane because we don't,
Yeah.
man, most people haven't even read them. There's no discussion. We don't know what's in there. And it passed overwhelmingly. And
Jesus.
so that's the stage. That's the old way where people had to just rely on upper union leadership because they're the only ones who had the information. And whenever we wanted information, it had to come from the postal record or from whatever our branch president happened to say to us if you went to the meetings. And that was it. That was your only source. And that's where this attitude comes from. But now, thanks to social media, thanks to podcasts, thanks to Reddit and Discord and all these different sources, we now have different avenues where we can get information. And you see it in this tentative agreement, where if we were still under the old regime, this tentative agreement would pass easily because all you're getting is the information from Renfro. And some of it is outright misrepresentations because he wants his agenda to move forward. But now we've got all these other sources. We've got other people who can analyze that contract, other ways we can read the contract. And that gives us all a much stronger voice. It increases our efficacy within the union. And in my personal experience, the good old boys, they don't like it.
No, of course not. Why would anybody like it when you challenge their cushy status quo for the
That's it.
betterment of other people? Like it, I could go on.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's key. And that's why, like, yeah, I love that there's all these other podcasts coming in and all these other resources because, ADA arbitration, obviously that's the big one and that's the one everybody listens to, but it's not for everybody. And you hear Corey will reference that like people don't like all the swearing or whatever, or how angry he is. And then there's a podcast like mine, which until pretty recently almost entirely just focused on education. And then there's all these other ones like the Branch 458 podcast, like Delivering Solidarity. And whatever you like, you can get that information from that source. And now here with the CCA Corner, these are niches that need to be filled. And I think it's fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I love that like without without really I mean like we all talk to each other a bit, but like it's not we're not all like walking in lockstep, but we're all kind of organically moving in the same direction and in different ways. So people are getting the same good information and just in a flavor and presentation that appeals to them the most, where they'll actually hear it. And that's
And
yeah, no, that's wild.
I think
Yeah.
I think it all comes down to the fact that in some way, shape, or form, all of us are motivated to help letter carriers in some way. We want to give back. We want to help to educate and to unite people. And, whether that's starting a podcast or helping with a podcast or getting the word out or just being there for people, all of that's important if we're going to do what's right for everybody, not just regular carriers, not just everybody who's been here for forever and ever, but every single city letter carrier who wears blue needs to have basic rights that benefit them. And right now, that's not how things are.
Yep, that's exactly right. And you'll notice on these podcasts that we actually cite the ELM or the M41 or the M documents or wherever we're getting this information. There's this knock against social media. And now Facebook is a separate issue. But on like the Reddit page, 8 arbitration, and on these podcasts, we're going directly to the source and spreading the exact primary information. And so you don't have this bad misinformation problem. Now, if you go on Facebook and you say, hey, I'm a steward and I have this issue, what should I do? You'll get 20 different answers and none of them are cited. And, that's a problem. But that's not the problem that I'm seeing on podcasts. Podcasts seem to really be taking care to make sure that they're speaking accurately.
Yeah, because the last thing you do want to do is, spread misinformation in an official form like a podcast and then have to go back and eat your
Right.
words, issue a public apology, take the episode down, whatever you got to do.
Yeah, with
Brent,
that in mind, I will do that now. In one of my first episodes, I had an episode called For the CCAs. And I talked about CCAs getting sent to other stations. And I did read directly from the JCAM about what the rules are for sending CCAs out. And I said, if they send you to another station, they've got to send the least senior person and they have to take volunteers. And it turns out that that is for going to a separate installation. And
Mhm.
installation and station are different. And I didn't know that at the time. So, I set the record straight. And when people call me with corrections or when they email me, yeah, I really make an effort to get the correct word out there. And I see that happening in other podcasts as well.
Yeah, we've done that as well. Like,
Yeah.
we're 3 episodes in. We're
Right.
still smoothing out the kinks and figuring out how to make all this work and figuring out what works best for us.
Right.
So, it's all a work in progress. But yeah, we definitely want to the best of our ability, give information that is true and factual and that will
Mhm.
benefit everybody,
Right.
regardless of what, pay status you are.
That's it. Yeah, and we're all kind of tugging on that same rope. And that's one of the things that I find really frustrating about this is that the people who are pushing back, the good old boys, it's like they don't want the rules to be put out there. They don't want that information to be known because exactly as Mallory said earlier in this episode, they're comfortable in their positions and they're not interested in being challenged.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
asked at my branch. I've had such a hard time getting anything moving. Like I've gone to Dallas branch, I've gone to Arlington branch, and like those they're great. But like where I'm coming from my branch, I've had to have asked my officers 6 different times on like, can I get information on like how to pass a resolution? And they want to just talk to me about, well, what are you trying to pass? It's like, no, bro,
Right.
just give me the information so I can bring it to the floor. And I end up having to go and research it online instead because I'm not like, don't even like the thought that some new jack coming in might want to try and change something.
Yeah,
Like
that's
it's
exactly right.
really wild.
Yeah, at my own branch, when I asked my union president, hey, can I get my hands on the bylaws? He says, what do you need them for?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
That shit's so fucking frustrating.
dude.
Pardon my language.
No, dude, you're right. And in our bylaws, it's actually required in the bylaws that everybody gets a copy of the bylaws. And so it's doubly painful to get that
Mhm.
answer.
Well, you
Yeah.
see, like if they just don't give them out, no one will know that. So,
Yeah. And it seems like that is by design. Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
It's so unfortunate to hear that because I am incredibly blessed to be in a very well functioning, though small branch. Shout out branch 383 Paducah. My branch president's the goat. I'm very happy with all of the people that I work with, and I wish that could be the same everywhere, but unfortunately, it is not.
Hmm. Yeah, that is true. So we have, after this interview, I have a union meeting today where, dude, I just recorded an episode last night, which will get released in the next few days, about all the shenanigans going into this meeting. And I've been going through this whole thing on Classes of Mail. And just this morning, there was another one. I might as well talk about it because this won't be released until after the meeting. But our branch secretary, who is acting like the de facto president, he so we a member of our union, not me, filed charges against our branch president for election interference, for a number of other things, and turned in those charges yesterday and for the meeting today to be read at the meeting and to get the process started. And the branch secretary wrote back to that member and said, okay, we're going to go ahead and handle these charges at the February meeting because in Article 10, it says that the charges will be read at the next meeting. And like, yeah, there's a meeting tomorrow. That's the next meeting. And he says, oh, no, no, not until February. Meanwhile, when Michael and I got the charges served against us a couple months ago, we got those charges 5 minutes before the meeting started.
Mm.
Yeah.
I I love the dirty tricks for us. No
Yeah.
tricks. Yeah, it's like
That is exactly right. Yeah.
well, it
Funny how
sounds
there's
like you
different
got
rules.
brand new charges to add on to that. You know what I
The
mean?
the
Yep.
branch secretary is probably going to be next in line because yeah,
Yeah,
he's overstepped so much and violated the Constitution, and this is just the latest example.
that's
Does
wild.
it Is your NBA's office have any stake in any of this, or
So far they don't seem particularly interested.
Hmm,
Yeah.
that's a shame. I That's another
Yeah.
issue with our current administration is the lack of involvement from our NVA's offices and
Mhm.
the lack of oversight and just I guess involvement is the right word. It's I'm from Region 6. Enough
Yeah,
said.
I'm in Region 1, and for I think the MBAs make like 130 or 150,000, something like that, and they have staff and RAAs who work for them. And yeah, if they can't get it done, our union's got plenty of money. They could always hire another person, but they really need to be more proactive in their jobs, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One question I had, I guess my
Yep.
main one, because like this this is how it's always been bullshit, and it
Ugh,
is what it is.
yeah.
All that stuff. Like I have people like in the DFW area that I respect greatly, and they're awesome at their job. But they'll even do some of it sometimes, and I have like I immediately can feel my heartbeat in my eyes when someone says shit like that. You know what I mean? Like it just my blood pressure goes through the roof, and I got to take a deep breath to have a good conversation about it. And like I know that is that's something we talk about a lot on the CCA corner because a lot of CCAs are dealing with this sort of well, I had it bad when I was a CCA, so you got to have
Oh,
it bad. That type of
yeah.
nonsense, right? And like so one of the things that we are trying to do that we talk about is like for one ingraining in our CCAs like this attitude of making sure that we leave things better than when we found them, right?
Absolutely.
And I think another part of that we want to be working on as well is like how to upset the apple cart. Like
Hmm.
I can make sure that all the CCAs who come in after me are taken care of by me, right? But like, what about when we're swimming in the sea of status quo nonsense? Like, what advice would you give to new jacks who show up and want to upset the status quo and sidestep some of that gatekeeping? What advice would you
Yeah.
have for them? I know that's kind of a vague
No, dude,
question, but
it's a very good question. And my answer to that is knowledge is power. That if you know what the actual rules are, including the bylaws for your local union, including the NALC constitution, including management's rules. Now, this is a lot for a new person to take in. But if you make it a mission to learn the job, learn the right way to do things, first, you make yourself untouchable. And two, you can now hold people accountable. Well, I maybe that overstates it to say that you can hold people accountable. It depends on the position you're in. Like if you're a steward, you can hold management accountable. If you are a rank and file member, you're supposed to be able to hold your own union officers accountable, and that's what the bylaws are for. And to me, this to change the status quo, one of two things is happening. Either they're not abiding by the bylaws, which is what's happening in my branch, or you need a change to your bylaws. Like you have bad bylaws. And there are things in our bylaws that I do want to see changed so that it empowers the members more, so that there are better avenues to hold leadership accountable, whether it's union leadership or contractual provisions for management. To me, when you're in a leadership position, that's not a privilege, it's a responsibility. And you owe the people below you to treat them well, to treat them fairly. So I want to give you guys a quick anecdote to kind of, by analogy, to make this point. I used to be a commissioner of a fantasy football league. And this back in the day when you had to do everything by hand, like you did the sports page and do everything. And so before I took over the league, the commissioner would win the championship or be in the championship pretty much every year because they had all the information. They knew who was traded to who, they knew all the free agents, all that stuff. So as soon as I got in, I started putting in all these rules to level the playing field, to make sure that everybody had access to the exact same information that I had. And one of the things that I'm most proud of in that league, I never won the championship.
The
that's
But
way it
that's
should
great.
to
be.
me, that's the responsibility of leader. You're given this privilege to be able to help the most people possible, and that becomes your obligation. That's your duty.
And that's
Yeah.
I've kind of so I'm the steward of my office and my sister office. There's three offices in my branch. And I've got a grievance in my sister office right now for like a past practice kind of no lunch thingy.
Mhm.
And I called all of them yesterday and today and was talking to them about it. Like, listen, I know that this doesn't seem like a big deal, but you have to think, I'm not getting any younger, and you're not getting any younger. And there will be people who come after us, and your postmaster and your supervisor are not going to be here forever either. So by filing these grievances on these things that we know that we can win, not only are we setting ourselves up for success in the future, we are setting everyone else up who comes after us up for success in the future because they already have these settlements and these grievances that we filed that they can then build cases on. And that's why it's so important to get involved and to make changes, because not only are you making things better for your people now, but you know, there's going to be more CCAs. Hopefully not. Hopefully
Right.
there's going to be more PTFs, but there's going to be more new carriers and new changes and status quo changes, and the way that we deliver the mail even will change. But by doing what's right now, we're doing what's right for everybody, both now and in the future. And I think that's super, super, super important.
Absolutely. And that dovetails onto a point that Badmouth made earlier, which was this attitude of, oh, well, it sucked for me, so it should suck for you too. No, man, it sucked for me, and I want better for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, good job, Mallory.
Yeah. It comes down to doing what's right versus what's easy. Not everybody's
Sure.
cut out to do what's right. Some people are just cut out to do what's easy, like the people who are voting yes on this contract. They want what's easy. I want what's
Yeah.
right.
So on that note, you guys are more widespread. I only have a very small circle of people that I have access to. And it came up on my last episode of Class as a Male, where we asked the question, how much influence and how much impact are we really having? So if you look at the people who go to a branch meeting, at my branch, we'll get at best 5% of the members show up to the meeting. And so even if they're motivated and involved, that doesn't account for the other 95% of people. And most of those other 95% were the way I was for the first 15 years of my career, where I just want to put the mail in a box and go home. And I don't pay attention to any of those things. And I wonder, we're definitely reaching way more people than have ever been reached in the union. But how much of an impact is that really going to have? You go onto social media, you see everybody is against, it's like 95% against the tentative agreement. But what do you guys think is going to happen when that vote comes in? What about the rest of the checked out membership? What's your guys' take on that?
Morris, you want to take that? And then
Yeah,
I'll give mine.
yeah. I think so. I would try to use my station as kind of a barometer, um, at least a little bit, because you know I'm I got some there's some folk in my station that like no matter whether they agree with me or not, they're not going to listen to me because I'm a CCA, right? And that's okay. That's okay. I expect that from some folk, and then some folk do listen. And like when we were when the TA first came out, before I was handing out flyers, before I was really talking to people about it, I was sort of asking folk, and you know, the, there was probably I'm in a smaller station. We got 20 routes. We probably got, with all our CCAs, probably 25 people in there, and 24 people in there. There was probably there's about five or six that were just like, I just want my back pay. This is how it always is. Yada yada yada. Like, just sort of, not one person was excited to vote yes. I don't think most of the people were going to even bother voting, honestly.
Right.
There's probably had maybe four or five that were just a definite hell no before I was saying anything to anybody, right? And then I was handing out flyers a little bit. So that was, three or four people talking about voting yes, four or five people talking about voting no, and the rest just, they're like, oh, we have a TA out now. Are
Right.
we getting a contract, right? So like that's kind of the way I feel about it, like for the barometer, not because like social media is we are siloing ourselves, the bubble and all that. I try to use my office as sort of the barometer. After getting out and talking, handing out flyers and stuff, I brought that number from 5 hell no's to got about 10 hell no's out of the office, almost a half split.
Yeah.
And then anyone who was, some of the old timers are just like, yeah, it's how it always is. I'm not, whatever.
Right.
My thinking on it is, while we are making, I think all this, the Vote No campaign and the rallies, I think that's making a huge amount of headway. And it's I think the amount, because it's not like we're I don't think we're necessarily changing yes votes mind, right?
Mhm.
But we are changing the mind of people who were just gonna they get the ballot in the mail, then they forget to send it off because we deal with mail all day. Why would I deal with this mail if it's not important to me, right?
Right. Yeah,
So I
that's a
think
good
it's
call. So, like, maybe if there were going to be 40,000 yes votes and 5,000 no votes, maybe there's still going to be 30,000 yes votes, but now there'll be 50,000 no votes.
exactly,
Yep.
exactly.
That would
We've
be awesome.
motivated people.
Right.
I think we've motivated people to actually. It's the bare minimum to get involved. I had coworkers at my station that never show up at branch meetings, and
Hmm.
like I'm the only person who talks about union shit like at my station half the time, and like which is sucks. But that's starting to change, and like I have people that before didn't give a shit about any of it, but they send me I get a random text message with a picture where they wrote rejected, and
Nice.
that's cool because like
Yeah.
they didn't give a shit before they didn't. When I said the TA, they're like, what's a TA? Oh, tentative agreement. It's for our contract. He's like, oh, we got a new contract. And I had to tell them about, and these are carriers who've been carrying for a minute, right?
Yeah.
I had to tell them about the ratification process, and like and like
I'm telling you guys, that was me until I started teaching in the Carrier Academy, which would have been about 6, 7 years ago. So the
yeah.
first 2/3 of my career, yeah, I couldn't have told you what the contract was or when it came out or anything like that. I just
Hmm.
didn't care. Yeah.
Yep.
And I
That's
probably, and that's a funny thing. Badmouth, you kind of bring this up that at least if I didn't care, I could have had the decency not to vote. But I prided myself on always voting. And I was just voting in pure ignorance. And I'm sure there's a ton of that.
it's ironic you say that because whenever I first started, my branch was defunct. There was no representation. I'm from an itty bitty bitty tiny office,
Mhm.
but we didn't have representation. I didn't know anything about the union. I didn't know how to file a grievance. We used to have to call a guy at a headquarters to be like, "Hey, I need a grievance filed." We didn't know to call the MBA's office. Um,
Mhm.
and it's slowly become more knowledgeable, and especially ever since I became a steward and I'm representing my two smaller branches. But around here, which I'm in rural West Kentucky, like
Mhm.
middle of nowhere West Kentucky, there's nothing here. But I have made sure to make it a point to get a contact in almost every office in our area from probably like an hour and a half radius around. I know at least a steward or a branch president or a member. And a couple weeks after the TA came out, I hit all the people up. I'm like, hey, how's your branch feeling about this? What are we thinking? How's your people looking? What's y'all's opinion? Resounding no's for the most part. They're like, yeah, a
Yeah,
couple old
same
heads
here.
here and there,
Yep.
but it for the most part, the entirety of West Kentucky itself is united in voting no. And there's a lot of branches out here that have passed vote no resolutions. So
So,
it's interesting to see, even with all the old heads and well, I heard one time
mhm.
that old heads is a disrespectful term. I try not to say that. But
If they've earned it,
yeah, but even with the older carriers, it's interesting to see how through word of mouth and through the means that like you and Corey and everybody have created to get this information across, it's interesting to see how that information is now being disseminated and people are realizing, oh, this is garbage. Oh,
Mhm.
something is wrong. Something is really wrong with our union. And people are starting to get that inkling in their head like, oh, something's up. This isn't cool.
Right. Yeah, I know that word is spreading from like about what's going on in my own branch and how it's being misrun and overstepping the rules because now I'm hearing from people in other parts of the country like, yeah, I mentioned like we had a carrier go on detail and he was in a completely different area in like Denver or something and he mentioned that what branch he was from to the local union president and like, "Oh man, I've heard of that branch, man. It's a mess down there." And so yeah, word is getting out.
Cole, do you kind of want to talk about how you perceive all that?
Sure. I mean, I think Badmouth summed it up the best, using his office as a barometer. Mine's the same way. My office has a lot of older carriers in, and a lot of those older carriers, they're not involved, and that's okay. But when the TA came out, there was a pretty visible uproar. Day one, the day that we got the summary, there was an uproar. And I know of some carriers who are saying, yeah, I want my money now. I mean, I'm thinking of one specifically, and I don't hold anything against him for this, but he says, I want my money now, so I'm voting yes. Okay. Well, I mean, that's fine. You're going to have those. And far be it for me to tell anybody how to vote. I did not do that in the meeting where I went over the tentative agreement. I will say how I'm voting, which is, and how I did vote, which is no. But to see the older carriers who are not involved anymore, who may have been at one time, but have since kind of lessened their involvement as they get closer to retirement, to see the uproar from them gives me hope that maybe it's not just a loud minority online, maybe it's just a loud minority of the majority.
I hope you're right.
I do too.
We're going to find out soon.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be amazing if this vote failed like 80-20 and we send that message? In my conversations with Tyler Vassar and with John Murphy, with union activists, people who are really pro-labor, we talk about turning our union from a business union that really just wants its money to a rank and file union where it's really worker controlled. And I feel it happening. And this democratization of information is a huge part of it.
Agreed. Yeah. No, it's that's the thing. Yeah. And I talk a lot when I get on my soapbox about change coming from the bottom up. Right. And whoever's in the office, the rank and file, with the democratization of information and stuff like that, we are all, we can take our leaders and drag them kicking and screaming if they aren't on our side, or, get them to be like, you know what, you guys are right. This is y'all's union. You know what I mean? And there's people on both sides of that. I know the CLC and and it's, I completely, my brain just stopped. Hold on.
That's all right. So an anecdote on that point, again, from my own branch, is I have a buddy who wanted to put, in advance of the national convention, he wanted our branch to put forward an open bargaining resolution.
Hell yeah.
And so he didn't know the process. Yeah, much like you had, Badmouth, he went to the union president. It was like, hey, I got this resolution that I want to get passed. I want to put it for the convention. And the union president looked it over and he's like, let's not do that.
Yeah.
And dude, the whole idea of putting forth a resolution is so that the branch votes on it. It is not the place of the president to just say, no, nobody should even be able to vote on this. It's madness. And so that's where this bottom-up movement has to come from, to know your rights. Part of the problem is this information is gatekept. And that's what this democratization is all about. And so it didn't even have to go through the president. There's a process for bringing a resolution to the branch that you don't have to get approval to do it. You can just do it. Yeah, exactly. And that's where people just need to be more educated and empowered.
Hell yes.
Yeah. All right. So I brought something. I prepared some stuff that I wanted to talk about. You guys, when Mallory reached out to me, she said, hey, is there anything that you'd like to go over with the audience? And I have it here. So if you guys don't mind, I'll get into this before we get, run out of time.
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So this is from the ELM. I did a whole series on my podcast where I went through the entire ELM and basically just condensed it, read the highlights. But to do that, I had to read the entire ELM from cover to cover and take notes. And dude, that was quite a process. But some of the stuff in there was so good. And I want to share some of it with you. This is from ELM section 370. It's titled Performance Evaluation. 371, Introduction. Postal Service employees are expected to conduct themselves in a manner that reflects favorably upon the organization and perform their duties in the most efficient manner. Both the supervisor and employee have a mutual responsibility to achieve these goals. When properly used, performance evaluation strengthens the daily supervisor-employee relationship in working toward this end. Okay, so performance evaluation. This is where, like at any other job that you have, you get like quarterly evaluations or whatever, and they'll sit you down and tell you how you're doing. This section is also used as a bludgeon for carriers when they're getting disciplined, where it says employees are expected to conduct themselves in a manner that reflects favorably on the organization. So management will use that. Like they have to be at least somewhat familiar with this provision because they'll use that in discipline and they'll say like what you did didn't conduct, reflect favorably. So that's part one, is that there's this tool, performance evaluation, and it's supposed to be used. All right, 372, sound supervision. The principles of sound supervision require that supervisors evaluate employee performance daily. Supervisors should counsel and instruct their employees as necessary, giving attention to evidence of good performance as well as to areas where the employees need improvement. Yeah,
When's the last time you had?
Like,
when's the last time? When is the last time your supervisor told you you're doing a good job? Tell me.
Yeah, that's it.
I've never fucking heard it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read it on my Christmas card. But that's the first I've heard it in a long time. They say occasionally they say, I appreciate you, but it's very few and far between. It's never,
Right.
You're
And it
doing
sounds-
great.
yeah.
You're doing so good. I'm so proud of you. When do I get that?
Yeah, in a stand-up talk, they'll say, thank you for coming in before they bitch the whole floor out for something stupid.
Right.
Like,
Yep. That's exactly right. And so this is something that's citable. Even if you're not a steward, you can still like show this to your supervisor. That's ELM section 372 and be like, hey man, what about this? There's another provision. I didn't pull it up for this about qualitative step increases. And I would bet your supervisor's never even heard of it. And this is where if you do an extra good job, you have like CCAs or low-level full-time regulars at your station who are just ass kickers, and they deliver the mail fast and do a great job, they can actually get step increases ahead of schedule as a reward for doing a good job. Supervisor just has to put them in for it.
yeah.
And
Holy
dude, that
shit.
never
I've
happened.
never heard that.
Yeah,
That's
it's
fucking
called
wild.
A qualitative step increase. And
'cause
it's
usually-
never used. There's all these attaboys that are never used. There's a whole section of the ELM about awards and getting cash awards and prizes and event tickets and stuff like that for doing a good job. And when I brought that up to my station manager, he laughed. And he's like, oh, I could never get approval for this. And I said, well, it's in the ELM. And he says, oh, we don't have the budget for it. And I said, dude, a certificate costs like $3. I will give you $3 to do a certificate. And of course, it never happened.
Yeah, I see the cars they drive. They aren't out of money. it'd be funny to print those out and just tape them above the urinals in the bathroom and
there you go.
Just hide them around the office. Yeah, because I mean, at
Oh.
the post office, I've realized that the reward for super hard work, if you're the best at digging ditches, their only reward they're going to give you is a bigger shovel.
Yeah, that's it.
It's
Yep.
yeah. I had no idea that there's
Mallory's
a
holding
carrot to
something
go
up.
with the stick.
The
What is
most
Mallory?
that I've ever gotten is I got this certificate for submitting a lead on my scanner that was like a $5,000 or $6,000 lead for that business in the post office.
Nice.
The MPU couldn't even sign it.
All right, so I know this is going to go out on audio. So since you guys can't see, Mallory held up this certificate of appreciation. It said lead. What was it called at the top? Lead something.
Leading together with all
Leading
capital L.
together, right? And
Certificate of
LEAD.
appreciation presented to Mallory Sutton in recognition of their support of the Leading Together program. Thank you for helping generate new revenue to ensure the future of the Postal Service.
There you go. Yeah, and then it wasn't even signed by.
And it wasn't even signed by the MPU.
Nice.
The district manager and the customer relations manager signed it, but not the MPU.
Dude, good
But
times.
I could talk about our MPU, so let's just not.
Right. Yeah. So in my station, once I had that disagreement with my station manager about awards, we have this custodian at our station. His name's Rob, and he is phenomenal. The dude completely turned our station around. He does all these little projects. He's absolutely amazing custodian. And I brought up, like, dude, at least give Rob an award. I mean, that guy is like rebuilding our station from the ground up, and nothing. And so I went out with my own money and bought a trophy. And it was intended to be like a fantasy football league trophy for the last place team. And it had a little garbage can on top of it. But I repurposed it and I put on there Custodian of the Year. And at one of our morning stand ups, I gave this little speech and I presented Rob with his Custodian of the Year award. And he loved it. He built a mantle in his office to put it up on, and it cost me like $40, and it was so good for morale. And this is where management is failing. Like, they could
Yeah.
so easily do stuff like that, and they just don't. And
Yeah,
it's in. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say there's supposed to be a carrot and a stick, but with
Yeah.
them it's all stick. Like,
That is exactly right. And that's why I wanted to read from the ELM, because the carrot is in the ELM. And this deal, like, they're supposed to actually look at how you're performing, what you're doing. And so this idea 372 is sound supervision. You need to go faster. That's not sound supervision. That's not instructional. That's not corrective. That's not anything useful.
Send me those sites, by the way, so I can put them on this episode.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. And then 373, performance evaluation systems. 373.1, performance evaluation. Postal Service headquarters prescribes formal evaluation systems for a variety of purposes. A formal evaluation consists of defined standards of performance, instructions for establishing a measure where an employee fits within the standards, and a form to record information. So this is really why I bring all this up, because when management tries to tell you that you're not doing a good job, that you need to go faster, I'm not happy with your performance, they're supposed to be doing this. They're supposed to be documenting what's going on, what steps you need to take to improve, talking with you about the ways you need to improve, and management doesn't do any of that stuff. So let me go on to 373.2, informal evaluation. Informal evaluation is based on the supervisor's day-to-day observation and is characterized by the absence of forms and instructions. The supervisor should make use of available human resources and give personal encouragement and guidance as a part of his or her daily practice. Exactly. These practices must be a part of a continuous formal and informal process. So is you need to go faster personal encouragement? No, they're failing in this basic obligation. And when they try to just say, oh, you need to go faster, they're not doing their job. And the whole idea, this is what gets CCAs tripped up, in my opinion, is management will lean on them like, hey, if you don't get this mail done by 5 o'clock, you're going to get disciplined. And because of provisions like this, that discipline would not stand because management's not doing their part. And CCAs don't have to fear that kind of discipline.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, no, I just had one of my coworkers came up to me after they're doing handoffs, divvying up the handoffs, and he said, "Hey, I'm not gonna use my manager's name, but he said, yeah. I asked which CCAs, what CCAs we had here, and he didn't say your name, and I said, well, what about Morris? And he said, oh, he doesn't count. And the reason I don't count is because I know the rules.
Exactly.
And I hand in a 3996, and I'm not gonna skip my breaks. Like, and
Right.
that's what we're trying to give all our CCAs that. So that is perfect. Thank you so much for that, Alan.
Well, I got one more on here, but it needs to be caveated. All of this is caveated with management controls your schedule. And so, there is always the fear, like, even if they can't issue you a letter of warning or a 7-day suspension, they can stop scheduling you, and that's where you need that strong union representation to step in and be like, hey, this is not right.
Yeah.
And at least, lean on management not to do that, because that's really the ultimate retaliation tool that management has. Have any of you guys experienced that as a CCA?
Yes.
Will you talk about that a little bit, Mallory?
Yes. So whenever I was a CCA for 4 years, we can get into that if you want, but basically I transferred twice. I transferred back to my office that I started at, and we hired another CCA below me. Well, I took my time. I wasn't rushing on the street. I wasn't a runner, none of that. But because of that, I wasn't as fast. And I'm not gonna bust my ass for a company that's gonna treat me like dog shit anyway. Um, but the other CCA was just a little bit faster. So what they ended up doing, they said, well, we're gonna equalize your hours, but we're gonna have her do the full-time route. Like I said, I only have 2 routes. We're gonna have her do the full-time route on the regular scheduled day off, and we'll just give you a handoff from that and make you equal. Whenever I
Oh,
first started at this office, I didn't get that at all.
right.
I was bottom totem pole, and that's not to say, like, well, I would, because it was that way whenever I started, it shouldn't be that way either. But like, it was just an example of how management was screwing me over for the purposes of numbers and for just being shitty just because I wasn't fast enough, quote unquote. And
Mhm.
it always ended up, and I say, they said they would equalize us. It never ended up being equalized. It was never perfect. It was never how it should be, in my opinion. But, it, and then that's not to say that I didn't want the other carrier to have hours. I did. It's just, I didn't like the way that management was handling things, and it seemed unfair in a way because they claimed to equalize but then did not. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Right. And that's one of those things where there's not really a contractual remedy for it, but a proactive union can sit down with management as equals and be like, "Hey, what's going on here? What can we do to make this situation better?" My concern is always what I'll approach to management is, look, you're cutting this person down to this many hours per week. Are we trying to get rid of them? Because we've got another carrier who we're working 60 hours a week and they don't want those hours. So if you keep going this way, you're going to wind up losing both of those carriers. And that doesn't benefit anybody. And sometimes talking sense works, sometimes it doesn't. All right. So the last item on here, 374, discussing performance with employees. The supervisor must discuss job performance with each employee. If the employee's performance is unsatisfactory, the supervisor suggests constructive measures for an employee to follow to improve his or her performance to a satisfactory level. And this is the defense that I would use to any discipline that any CCA gets for not performing to expectations. Well, did you sit them down? Did you give them suggestions? Because again, just go faster. That's not a suggestion.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, I know that saved my ass in an II before is just like I I didn't know. It's the Homer Simpson defense. I call it the Homer
Mm.
Simpson defense. It's my
Okay.
first day. It's my first day.
Yeah.
That's like like and
I didn't know will always work once.
yes,
Yeah, it
yep.
does work. Yeah.
And the thing is one thing that I know it was come up in the CCA corner sort of channel and like on Reddit and stuff is people talking about because they'll do these stand-up talks and then they'll pass around a piece of paper that they want everyone to sign and then they'll call that a training and like I tell people not to sign that shit. Don't sign it. Like that's not an official document. And what did they say in that training that had in that stand-up talk that had any substance? And did they give you a printout of what was talked about in that stand-up talk? Because they're
Right.
going to use that to just jam you up later in one of these things.
Hmm.
And yeah. And the one thing I just want to bring in where you're talking about how management, like their big thing that they can do is ice you out of hours. One of the
Hmm.
episodes that we have coming up is going to be about mini bids because like
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean outside my 90 days and I got a year and 8 months in I think at this point.
Hmm.
Outside of my 90 days, I have been on a hold down. I've had a hold down all but maybe 4 days of that
Right.
time, so they haven't been able to ice me out. And
Right.
like, so we're gonna be talking about that stuff, and then some other uh, one of the other tricks is just like when they loan you out to other stations, make a good relationship with the supervisor there because that you might be able to call them up if your station's
Hmm.
icing you out to be
Yeah,
like, hey,
you
do you
can
guys
hustle
need
to get
help?
work. Yep.
Yeah. Is there any other advice you can
Dude,
think of off the
that's
top of your head?
that's the number one advice. You nailed it exactly. When I have CCAs who are worried about the hours they're getting, that's the number one thing I tell them is you have to get an opt. You have to do an opt hold down and get yourself a vacant route. And in So you may have provisions in your local agreement, you probably do, about how opting is supposed to be handled. But in the national agreement, it says that carriers can learn about ops or vacancies by word of mouth. And
Yep.
so in our local, there's a provision that the ops are supposed to be posted and advertised, like what's coming up. But if a carrier is going to go out on medical or something, you don't necessarily, as a steward, I don't necessarily know that. And if the carrier pulls you aside as a CCA and is like, hey, I'm going to go out on medical for like 3 months and I'd really like you to carry my route, that's perfectly valid contractually. If you put in a valid opt, unless there's something specifically against it in your local, that opt should be accepted. And so don't just rely on, oh, who's on the vacation board next week. Keep your ears open. Somebody goes on a detail and they're going to be working in Washington, D.C. for the next 3 months. Their route's available for opt, and that's not on the vacation board. And so keep your ears open, look out for those ops. And if you don't have a diligent steward, even vacation bids get missed sometimes. Or when people bid to other stations, that gets missed. There's all kinds of ways that you can get ops if you just hustle. I'll tell you another one. If you have vacation relief or reserve carriers where it's a full-time regular, but they don't have their own assignment, they are at the top of the list when it comes to opting. But when they opt on a route, their reserve assignment is now available because it comes with its own regular schedule.
Oh, no
And
shit.
so, oh, I just got beat out for this 3 month assignment by the vacation relief. Well, now you can bet on the vacation relief spot, and at least you have a regular schedule for the next 3 months, even if you don't have a route.
That's awesome.
And another thing that we should write down about hitting at some point is, if whenever I first started in my office, one full-time regular route, one 3-hour aux route, there was already a PTF. So I was the CCA. I was only working Saturdays and I was getting pimped out to other offices. I got sent to a office that was 30 minutes away. I was constantly getting sent there because they were understaffed. And eventually I was like, you know what? What would I have to do to just come here, to just be an employee here?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not getting enough hours. I'd like to transfer. And eventually I just transferred there. CCAs can just transfer.
Yeah, it's true. You just
there's a
need permission
process to
from
it.
both installation heads.
Yep. And they can't
Or whatever,
unreasonably deny you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we should cover at some point.
Yeah,
There's
no,
no,
really
that's
good.
one of those things where there's no harm in asking, because the worst they're going to tell you is no. And if they tell you no, you're in the same position you were in before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's all awesome. I've already been taking a shit ton of notes.
So let me ask you this. Give me your opinion on the way that CCAs are being treated now, how things can change, how you would like to see things change, and what kind of things should change, I guess. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so to me, CCAs need to be empowered. Like, even within the first 90 days, to me, this is a prime example. When you're in your first 90 days, you cannot file, the union is not supposed to be able to file a grievance if you get fired. But every other part of the grievance procedure is open to CCAs. It's not like in the first 90 days, management can just do anything. The only thing they can do without grievance is fire you. And even that, sometimes the union can still file a grievance and get you your job back. So right from the beginning, CCAs have all the same rights as any other carrier. Another good example is like with the hours you work, a CCA is limited to 11 and a half hours in a day all year long. That is the limit that's in management's handbook. I think it's in the ELM actually. That as an employee, that's what they're limited to. And so there's no, 14-hour, 16-hour days. That's contractual violations. And I'll tell you, you're supposed to obey now and grieve later. And I get that. But in my own experience, and from talking to stewards around the country, if you are coming up on that 11 and a half hours and you're like, dude, I'm exhausted, I can't keep going, I'm going to go home, and management tries to instruct you to keep delivering, if they try to issue discipline for failure to follow that instruction, there's no way that discipline can stand, because A, they're openly violating the contract, and B, you're citing a legitimate safety issue. There's a reason that these limits are in place.
There was also an NLRB case about that, like where the National Labor Relations Board said, nah, you can't do that, fam.
Right. Exactly. And so management preys on CCA's ignorance. They prey on everybody's ignorance. And in many cases, management is just as ignorant. I can't tell you how many times I brought these rules to management and they have no idea the rules existed either. Because just like management never gives you the time to read the M41, their bosses never give them the time to read the ELM.
You
And so
cut
they
into
don't
the
know what
TikTok
they're
time.
doing. Yeah. And so if there's going to be an information imbalance, you want it to be in your favor as a carrier. And that's really easy to do. It starts with the M41. So to me, as a CCA, I think the number one thing you can do, number one is opt, obviously. But then number two, read the M41 and learn the proper ways to do the job. Because if management comes out and you're trying, let's say you're really afraid of management continuing to say to you, you need to go faster. And so you start taking shortcuts and maybe you're not curbing your wheels in your truck and, setting the brake or whatever. If management comes out, they can come out and say you need to go faster, but what useful advice are they going to give you? But if they come out and they see that your wheels aren't curved and you're doing these safety violations, you're going to get disciplined for that, guaranteed. And so knowing the right way to do the job, knowing what your rights are, turns that balance of power in your favor. And to me, that's the path forward for CCAs. It used to be, I'll wrap up here. It used to be there was the 4-day carrier academy, then 3 days of on the job instruction, and then that's it. The next time that there's instruction of any kind is never. That's all the training for your entire career. But now with all these resources, with classes of mail, with from A to arbitration, with the CCA corner, with the list goes on and on. The resources are available to make you more empowered in your career. All you got to do is use them.
Well said.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right.
I
Yeah.
don't think I got much more.
No better place to wrap up than that.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah. I don't want to follow that.
Well, Alan,
Well, guys,
I really
thanks for having me
appreciate
on.
you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. I love seeing what you guys are doing. I think it's incredibly important, and you have my full support. I was a great pleasure being on with you guys.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you, man.
You bet.
And if there's anything that we can ever do for you, you know where to find us.
Hey, understood. I appreciate that.
we all gotta stick together on our path towards unity and solidarity and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's it for us. We'll probably have another episode coming out here soon. Again, we usually record and have episodes out every other Wednesday, if not every Wednesday. This will probably end up being a every Wednesday deal. But just keep an eye out for more episodes from us. You know where you can find us. You can find us on Discord and on Reddit, and you can send us an email or you can go to from8arbitration.com. Alan, where can people find you?
Classes of Mail is the name of my podcast, and you can also email me, classesofmail@gmail.com. And I'm on every social media as just Alan Gegax. And I accept messages from strangers.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
All right.
All right.
Well, we'll catch you guys next time.
Solidarity forever, guys.